Hollywood is just spineless, en masse. It really felt like a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore.
Allowing me to collaborate, so I had great direction and a great role. It was just intense.
There are two kinds of people in Hollywood. The ones who know exactly how the machine works and stay quiet about it, and the ones who know exactly how the machine works and start talking anyway. Jim Carrey is the second kind. Keanu Reeves, he's something else entirely. He's the guy who knows everything, says almost nothing, and when he does move, you feel it. And when those two men end up on the same side of a story, you need to stop scrolling and pay attention. Because what's unfolding between Jim Carrey, Keanu Reeves, and one of the most untouchable names in entertainment isn't just Hollywood gossip. It's a window into how this industry actually operates behind the velvet rope, past the camera flashes, and underneath the standing ovations. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start with the night Jim Carrey looked into a live camera and said what nobody else in that room had the nerve to say out loud. The night Jim Carrey called Hollywood spineless. It was supposed to be a standard celebrity interview. Jim Carrey was promoting Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sit down, smile, plug the movie, wave goodbye. That's the script every publicist writes. That's the deal every star accepts when they walk into those lights. Jim Carrey tore the script in half. When the conversation shifted to Will Smith's now infamous Oscar slap, the moment the entire world had been dissecting for days, most of Hollywood was busy doing what Hollywood always does in a crisis, saying the right amount of nothing, crafting statements carefully designed to offend nobody, performing concern without actually taking a side. Jim took a side. He sat there in front of the camera and said, "Hollywood is just spineless en masse." He didn't mince it. He didn't walk it back with a laugh. He said it plainly, like a man who has been holding that thought for years and finally found the right moment to let it go. Think about the weight of that statement. This isn't some unknown actor venting on a podcast. This is Jim Carrey, the man who carried entire studios on his back in the 1990s, the man who delivered Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon, all inside of one decade. Studios lined up to write him checks. They plastered his face on every billboard. He was the industry's golden ticket, and he called the entire industry spineless. But here's the part that makes it hit even harder. Jim didn't just call the moment spineless. He pointed to what it revealed. He said it felt like a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore. That word, club, that's the key. Because Jim wasn't just commenting on one ugly night at the Oscars. He was describing something structural, something with membership rules and unspoken codes of conduct. He was describing the machine from the inside. And then, as if one bombshell wasn't enough, he went further. He announced, publicly, on live television, that he was suing Will Smith for $200 million because he said that video is going to be there forever, that it's going to be ubiquitous. The room laughed nervously. The audience shifted in their seats. His publicist probably aged a decade in that interview chair. But notice what happened next. The same Hollywood that Jim had just called spineless did exactly what he predicted it would do. They stood up and applauded Will Smith anyway. Same room, same night, same people who just watched a man get walked up on and slapped on a live global broadcast, and they gave a standing ovation. Jim saw it. He said it out loud. And they proved him right in real time. Now stop and think about that for a second, because this is the part most people glossed over in the immediate aftermath. The conversation became about Will Smith, about Chris Rock, about who was right and who was wrong in that specific moment. What got buried was the meta-story, the fact that an entire room full of the most powerful, celebrated, and supposedly morally conscious people in entertainment watched something happen that disturbed the world and then applauded, not reluctantly, not quietly. They gave a full standing ovation.
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse.
Jim Carrey didn't predict that would happen. He watched it happen live and named it for what it was. That's not a man who is unhinged. That's a man with pattern recognition sharp enough to see the story inside the story. Ask yourself, when was the last time you watched someone in that industry tell the absolute truth, and the industry immediately respond by demonstrating that truth with their own behavior? That's not coincidence. That's something deeper. The Kimmel moment nobody could fully explain. Here's where things move from bold into something more complicated, because Jim Carrey's critique of Hollywood didn't stop at the Oscars. It didn't stop at calling people spineless. Something happened on Jimmy Kimmel Live that made a lot of people re-watch the clip 2, 3, and 4 times, and still walk away unsatisfied with the easy explanation. Jim was on stage, promo tour in full swing, late-night lights on, audience warmed up, and then he did something completely unexpected. He held up a hand gesture, a triangle shape, and asked the audience if they knew what it was. Kimmel played dumb. The audience laughed, and Jim looked straight ahead and said, "The time is up." He called himself a whistleblower. He said he was sick and tired of the secrets and the lies. Then he identified it as the secret symbol of the Illuminati.
To be the whistleblower, I'm sick and tired of the secrets and the lies. It is the secret symbol of the Illuminati.
And turned to Kimmel and said, "You're a part of it." Now the room erupted. Everyone laughed. It played like a bit, a brilliant, absurdist Jim Carrey bit. But slow down, because here's the question you need to sit with. Was it actually a joke? Jim Carrey's entire comedy legacy is built on packaging heavy things inside laughter. He is, by his own admission, someone who uses performance to say things that can't be said directly. He has spent years talking about the hollowness of the celebrity identity, how the self you present to the world is a construction, a character designed for public consumption. He knows better than almost anyone that the most dangerous truths often get dismissed because they're delivered by a man who used to talk through his rear end in a comedy film. So when Jim takes a late-night promo slot, a paid, scheduled primetime promotional appearance, and uses it to call out the host as part of a secret power structure, to tell the viewing audience they're being kept distracted and docile, to declare himself a whistleblower in front of millions of people, what are we actually watching? He even went further. He described powerful people going out into the woods in circles, making decisions that trickle down into what we watch and believe. He said the hosts, the personalities, the faces on your screen, they're there to throw you off the track. And then he laughed. And everyone laughed with him. That is either the most elaborate comedy bit in late-night history, or it's a man who figured out that the only way to say something real is to wrap it in a punchline. Because the moment you drop the punchline, the moment you say it straight, they label you unstable, and the story becomes about your mental health instead of what you said. Jim Carrey knows this. He's watched it happen to others. He's possibly felt it himself. And so he does the only thing that can't be fully neutralized. He says it laughing. He says it loud. And he says it on their own stage, using their own airtime. And there is nothing they can do about it once it's already out there. There's something else worth noting here. Kimmel's reaction in that clip is fascinating when you watch it carefully. He doesn't shut it down. He doesn't redirect. He plays along, enthusiastically, in a way that almost feels like a man performing ignorance rather than actually experiencing it. Whether that's just good television instinct or something more revealing depends on what lens you're using. But the audience didn't ask that question in real time. They were too busy laughing, which might have been exactly the point. Dave Chappelle, Cat Williams, and the pattern that won't go away. Jim Carrey is not the only one who saw the machine from the inside and came out talking. Dave Chappelle sat down and told a story that should have changed the conversation about Hollywood entirely. He described walking into a film trailer, a movie he was already deep into producing, and finding a dress waiting for him. No prior discussion, no script note, just a dress and a room full of people who treated it like the most natural thing in the world. When he refused, the pressure started. Writers, directors, producers, one by one, each coming in with a different angle. It would be hilarious. All the greats have done it. Think about how much this scene costs if we have to reshoot it. The clock is ticking. The budget is bleeding. Dave held firm. And the moment he made absolutely clear he wasn't wearing the dress, a brand new scene appeared in 10 minutes. Just like that. Think about what that means. Because Dave Chappelle thought about it, and it changed the way he saw everything. He asked himself, how do you write a whole new scene in 10 minutes if the original scene was organic? How do you have a ready replacement if the first request was spontaneous? You can't, unless it was never spontaneous, unless the humiliation was preloaded, already written, already waiting, already sitting in a folder before he ever walked into that trailer. The whole setup, the pressure, the time crunch, the procession of authority figures, was the mechanism. The goal wasn't the scene. The goal was the compliance. The goal was to see whether Dave Chappelle could be made to say yes to something that made him deeply uncomfortable, under pressure, in a room where everyone was telling him it was normal. And when he said no, they immediately moved to Plan B, because the machine always has a Plan B. Cat Williams adds the final layer. He says flat out that nothing in this business is accidental. He talks about how the same three faces appear at every award show and magazine cover, and how they get protected every single time a scandal erupts around them. He draws a direct line between artist deaths and money, how certain deaths happen at precisely the moment when the financial value of silence outweighs the cost of continued negotiation. He names the math of it: kill a $20 million liability and unlock $60 million in future earnings, and suddenly, the machine doesn't need to negotiate anymore. Suddenly there's only a mother to deal with once a year and the money just keeps climbing. Look at what happened after Michael Jackson died. His catalog, the very catalog he fought Sony for years to control, exploded in value overnight. Look at Prince, who wrote the word slave on his face, who walked away from his own name rather than surrender his masters, and who died while those masters reverted to full industry control. Look at Whitney Houston, whose voice became an endless commercial product the moment she was no longer here to say no to anything. Cat Williams isn't calling this proof of a conspiracy. He's calling it a business model. And the difference between those two things is smaller than most people want to admit. What connects all three of these men, Chappelle, Williams, and Carrey, is that they each reached a specific point in their career where they stopped calculating the cost of honesty. They each looked at what they had built and decided that the machine's approval wasn't worth what the machine was asking them to pay for it. And they each paid a price for that decision in ways that the industry hoped would serve as a warning to everyone watching. But the warning didn't land the way the industry intended. Instead of silencing the conversation, it amplified it. Because when powerful, credible, successful men start describing the same room from different angles, people start believing the room is real. Mel Gibson, The Social Contract, and What You're Not Allowed to Say. Then there's Mel Gibson, and what he describes is the contract underneath everything, the agreement that nobody signs but everybody knows. He calls it the social contract, and when he breaks it down, it's almost elegant in how simple it is. You will get betrayed in this industry. You will watch people you helped climb over you. You will feel the knife between the shoulder blades, and he says it just like that, like a man who knows exactly what that sensation feels like. And you are not allowed to be angry about it. Not just not supposed to, not allowed. The moment you express real anger about the betrayal, you become the problem. You become the difficult one, the unstable one, the one whose bitterness is the story instead of the betrayal itself. That is the genius of the machine's self-protection. It doesn't need to silence you directly. It just needs to make sure that any expression of justified anger becomes a PR liability for the person feeling it. So you learn to smile. You learn to laugh it off. You learn to sit next to the person who just buried a knife in your back and make small talk, because that's what professionals do. And here's the thing about Mel Gibson saying this publicly. He's not exactly a man the industry protects. He has been through the machine himself. He's been dismantled by it and partially rebuilt. So when he describes the social contract, he's not describing a theory. He's describing something he learned through direct personal experience, the way you only truly learn things that cost you something.
I mean, this is a bizarre place. The social contract. You can't get mad.
Now line it all up. Jim Carrey saying the club is spineless. Dave Chappelle exposing preloaded humiliation. Cat Williams saying the deaths aren't accidental. Mel Gibson describing the mandatory silence. These are not four separate stories. These are four men describing four different corners of the same room. The same room that most people in that industry pretend doesn't exist, and that a very small number of people have walked out of and started talking about. What is that room, and who is guarding the door? Oprah Winfrey and the questions that never went away. There's a name that keeps circling this conversation. A name that appears in the periphery of too many stories to be dismissed as coincidence. A name that represents, perhaps more than any other in entertainment history, the idea of untouchability. Oprah Winfrey. Now let's be precise here, because Oprah Winfrey built something genuinely extraordinary. She came from nothing. She created a media empire through intelligence, charisma, and relentless work. She's a cultural phenomenon who changed the landscape of television and publishing and philanthropy. That is all real. And it is also real that the questions around her never fully disappeared. There's the South African school, the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls.
I was opening my school in South Africa, and I had brought 200 friends from the United States for that celebration.
That was investigated multiple times after allegations surfaced regarding mistreatment of students. Oprah issued apologies. Investigations were conducted. But ask yourself, how does that story stay contained? How does the person whose name is on the building walk away with her moral authority not just intact, but elevated? In what other context does someone's school face serious allegations and the public response is, well, that's unfortunate, but she still seems trustworthy? There's the proximity to Harvey Weinstein, the photographs,
first conversation Harvey Weinstein had with the New York Times reporters,
the decades of professional and social connection. When Weinstein's crimes finally broke through the media surface, after years of being actively suppressed, the conversation quickly circulated about who in that industry had known, or suspected, or looked the other way. Oprah's name came up, not as an accused party, but as someone whose closeness to Weinstein raised questions about what she may have known and when she knew it. Those questions were never fully answered. They were never fully asked. There's Ice Cube and other artists who have made pointed references to what they describe as Oprah quietly blacklisting anyone who doesn't cooperate with the elite tier of the entertainment establishment. Who talks about an invisible ceiling that exists for black artists specifically? A ceiling that gets deployed whenever someone gets too loud, too independent, too unwilling to play by the rules of the inner circle. These aren't fringe voices. These are people with careers, with credibility, with nothing obvious to gain by making these accusations. And then there's the network, which spells own forward, which backward spells NWO, which happens to be an acronym that conspiracy culture has attached to theories about a global power structure for decades. Is that meaningful? Probably not in isolation. But in the context of everything else circling this conversation, it's the kind of detail that gets people asking harder questions. Now here's the critical point. None of this, none of it, is proof that Oprah Winfrey is a villain. That is not what this is saying. What it is saying is that the protection this industry extends to certain names is extraordinary, and the same industry that calls itself a place of accountability, that holds award shows celebrating art and humanity and social justice, extends that protection so completely, so consistently, that genuine questions get buried under an avalanche of positive press and cultural goodwill. The machine decides who is protected, and then the protection becomes the proof of innocence in the public mind. Because surely if there was something real there, we would have heard about it. Jim Carrey understands this. When he called Hollywood spineless and pointed at the standing ovations and the protected names, he was drawing a map. He just didn't label every street. Keanu Reeves, the last clean star. Before we get to what Keanu allegedly did, we need to understand who Keanu Reeves actually is, because what he represents in this industry is almost as important as what he reportedly said. He is, by every account from every person who has ever worked with him, the anomaly, the exception, the one A-lister that nobody has a bad word about, not former co-stars, not crew members, not stunt teams, not production assistants, not industry insiders with axes to grind. Nobody. He gives away millions to stunt workers. He takes pay cuts so the people building the sets and rigging the wires can get paid better. He rides public transit alone. He doesn't travel with an entourage. He shows up, does the work, gives everything to the scene, and goes home. He's been spotted sitting on the floor of the subway because there wasn't a seat available. He's been photographed helping strangers with their luggage. The internet has essentially made him into a secular saint. And in an industry where that reputation would typically attract exactly the kind of powerful attention that demands something in return, Keanu has somehow maintained it without getting absorbed by the machine. Think about that, because the machine always finds a way to fold people in. It offers you the parties, the access, the invitations to the exclusive rooms where real decisions get made. And eventually, most people take the invitation. Because the alternative, staying outside that circle, has a cost. Roles start going to other people. Projects mysteriously stall. Industry relationships cool without explanation. Keanu reportedly paid that cost. Stories have circulated about periods when he was deliberately overlooked.
Keanu is humble and knows how to value those who have always been by his side, and another proof of that is who he brought with him to the 2020 Oscars.
When franchises he could have anchored went to other names, when the industry's power center seemed to quietly route around him. Not because he couldn't deliver, The Matrix alone answers that question permanently, but because he reportedly refused to compromise in the ways the inner circle demands. He didn't play ball with the exclusive parties. He didn't attach himself to the right social networks. He stayed surgical, stayed grounded, and kept his distance from the people and the gatherings where too much gets asked in exchange for too much being given. Jim Carrey called him one of the nicest, coolest people on the planet, said nobody ever has a bad word about him, and then said Keanu might be what we should all aspire to be. Think about what it means for Jim Carrey, a man who just finished calling all of Hollywood spineless, to name one person as the exception, to say this is the model, this is the standard. In a town that eats its own on a schedule, Keanu Reeves has somehow become the man that even the machine's harshest critics point to and say, him, that one, that's what it should look like. The warning that changed everything. Now here is where the story shifts into territory that the industry did not see coming. According to the information that has been circulating, from insider accounts, from people close to both men, from the growing body of testimony that surrounds this conversation, Keanu Reeves did not stay silent when the machine began to move against Jim Carrey. Because after Jim's Oscars rant, after the Kimmel secret symbol moment, after the interviews warning kids to stay away from Hollywood, the industry began doing what the industry always does to people who break the social contract: the quiet freezing out, the subtle withdrawal of opportunities, the coordinated cooling of professional relationships that happens without a single meeting or memo, but somehow lands on everyone's desk at the same time. There were efforts, allegedly, to sideline Jim, to let him know that his career trajectory was now subject to revision, that the machine has a memory and a long reach, and that the people he'd called out had friends in every room. And then Keanu reportedly sent a message, not a tweet, not a public statement, a message, directly aimed at the power structure that was moving against Jim, a clear communication that Jim Carrey was not a target, that Keanu believed Jim was being punished for speaking honestly about the industry's corruption, its soullessness, its greed, and that there would be consequences for anyone who tried to make Jim Carrey disappear from his own industry. There are also reports that Keanu reached out to Jim personally, not to tell him he was wrong, not to quietly suggest he tone it down, but to tell him he'd said something real, and to make sure Jim knew that at least one person at the top of this industry was standing beside him. Not in the safe, diplomatic, carefully calculated way that Hollywood stars occasionally perform solidarity in public, but privately, personally, man to man. Why does that matter so much? Because Jim Carrey had just accused this industry of being spineless.
Jim Carrey has been honored at Francis César Awards, and, well, he's apologizing now for his poor French.
He'd named names, not always specifically, but clearly enough. He'd pointed at the standing ovations. He'd pointed at the protected names. He'd pointed at the machine itself. And in an industry that responds to that kind of accusation by closing ranks and generating career-ending silence, one of the most respected men in entertainment stood up and said, "Not this time." Keanu Reeves doesn't lend his credibility carelessly. His entire reputation is built on the fact that he doesn't do what's expected of him when what's expected is convenient but wrong. He takes the pay cut when the studio wouldn't. He takes the slower project when the bigger check would require him to compromise. He stays on the subway when the town car would be provided. And he stands beside Jim Carrey when the industry would rather Jim quietly disappear. The Oprah question and what Keanu reportedly knows. Here is where the story becomes something that the industry truly doesn't know how to handle, because Keanu Reeves' distance from Oprah Winfrey's sphere of influence is reportedly not accidental. Think about what that means in concrete terms. Oprah's world in Hollywood is enormous. Her connections span decades, and cover almost every major name in the entertainment and media landscape. To maintain a successful career in that industry, while deliberately maintaining distance from someone with that level of gravitational pull, that requires intention. That requires a decision. And the question that circles this is, what does Keanu know that made that decision easy?
Maybe the attraction of the story and the script, and maybe for the audience member, I always thought of it as being kind of Old Testament in a revenge kind of way.
He has been in the rooms. He has been invited to the gatherings. He has been present at the events where the real social architecture of Hollywood gets built and reinforced. He's not naive. He's not uninformed. He has spent 30 years navigating this industry at the absolute highest level. If Keanu Reeves, the nicest man in Hollywood, the one person nobody has a bad word about, has made a sustained, deliberate choice to stay out of Oprah's orbit, while publicly aligning himself with Jim Carrey, a man who has spent years pointing at the industry's dark architecture. What exactly is the shape of what he knows? Jim says the club is spineless. He says the same faces get protected at every scandal. He throws up the triangle on Kimmel and calls it the secret symbol, then looks straight into the camera and tells millions of viewers they're being managed by the people they're watching. And Keanu Reeves looks at all of that and says, I'm with him, not just privately, reportedly, actively. Reportedly in a way that sent a message to the machine that this particular target was going to cost more than it was worth. 2 men, 1 truth, and why the industry can't handle either of them. Here is the final picture, and it is worth taking in slowly. You have Jim Carrey, loud, chaotic, brilliant, relentless, burning through every social norm and industry expectation like a man who has already decided he doesn't need the club's approval anymore. He is the one who stands up at the standing ovation and stays seated. He is the one who uses the promo tour to mock the promo tour. He is the one who wraps his most serious accusations in laughter because he knows the laughter is the only armor that keeps the message from being buried. And then you have Keanu Reeves, quiet, precise, immovable, building a career that has somehow survived 30 years of industry pressure without surrendering a single piece of what he is. The man who can afford to be loved by everyone because he refuses to be owned by anyone. One is the alarm going off, the other is the fire that won't go out. And between them, they have described something that the industry's PR machinery, its publicists, its editors, its talk show hosts, its award ceremony planners, has no real answer for. Because you can call Jim crazy. Hollywood has been doing that quietly for years. But you cannot call Keanu crazy. You cannot call him bitter, or unstable, or difficult, or delusional. The entire architecture of his reputation makes every one of those labels fall apart on contact. So when Keanu Reeves puts his name next to Jim Carrey's and puts distance between himself and Oprah Winfrey's world, and reportedly sends a message to the machine to stand down, the machine faces a problem it hasn't fully solved yet. And how do you discredit the message when the messenger is unimpeachable? You can't call them both crazy. You can't dismiss what they're saying as the bitterness of men who couldn't hack it, because one of them is the internet's most beloved figure, and the other was the most bankable star on the planet at his peak. You can't redirect the story into a mental health narrative because the quiet one makes the loud one's clarity undeniable. They've called Jim Carrey unhinged and watched him continue to be right. They've tried to sideline him and watched Keanu publicly stand beside him. They've protected Oprah for decades and watched the questions around her grow louder every year, not quieter. And here we are, watching 2 men who both came up through the same machine, who both got handed the keys to the kingdom and chose very different ways to use them, standing on the same side of a line that most people in that industry are terrified to approach. The industry expected silence. It got the opposite. It expected that the social contract, the one Mel Gibson described, the one that says you take the knife and smile, and you are not allowed to be mad, would hold. It held for decades. But there's something different happening now. The cameras are everywhere. The clips never disappear. The audience is no longer passive. And when Jim Carrey says that video is going to be ubiquitous, he's talking about more than Will Smith's slap.
Jim Carrey weighing in on Will Smith's Oscar controversy during a new interview with Gayle King for CBS Morning.
He's talking about the fact that the machine can no longer control what gets seen. It can shape the narrative, but it can't erase the footage, and that changes the math of silence permanently. this isn't the end of the story. In fact, it might be the beginning of the part the industry has been hoping would never start. Jim Carrey said it himself. The time is up. People are hip to this kind of stuff now. And when the nicest man in Hollywood reportedly agrees, not with a press release, not with a carefully calibrated public statement, but with a private message sent directly into the heart of the machine, then maybe the time really is up. The question you need to be asking right now is simple. If these two men, with everything they have, with everything they've built, with every reason to stay quiet and stay paid, looked at this industry and decided the truth was more important than the access, what does that tell you about what the truth actually is? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation isn't over. It's just getting started.